Well, good evening and welcome to the Harding Distinguished Lecture Series. My name is Tracy Green, and I'm in-house legal counsel at South Dakota State University. And the Harding Distinguished Lecture Series began in 1963 in honor of Albert Harding, a university alumnus, and also a former university professor. This lecture continues the tradition of bringing people of national and international reputation and importance to speak at South Dakota State University on timely topics of interest. This year, we're pleased to have South Dakota World Affairs Council as a co-sponsor on this lecture. And we'd also like to acknowledge the generous support of the South Dakota Humanities Council and SDN. It's true that we continuously hear about issues that are occurring on our computer and information systems. Some of those are critical incidents. Some of them are what we would call super sophisticated criminal activity, or we may even just hear about issues on control and use of computer resources. National and international peace, economic and social stability depend even more greatly now on these computer resources and also the security of those resources. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing our distinguished keynote speaker, Mr. Michael McNerney, who will be presenting on the topic of cyberwar and how the internet changes world conflict. He will also be participating in the South Dakota World Affairs Council Symposium tomorrow, and it is open to the public, so I definitely encourage you to check out this agenda and attend that. Mr. McNerney is an individual of international and national importance. He most recently served as a policy advisor at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and in this role he helped to draft the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. He also participated in establishing the U.S. Defense Industrial Base Enhanced Cybersecurity Services Program, a mouthful for me, but this is a program that leverages government resources to protect industry from cyber threats. Mr. McNerney is also an attorney after my own calling, and he's worked for the Department of Defense Office of General Counsel on Internet and Cybersecurity matters. Mr. McNerney worked at the U.S. State Department, where he promoted the rule of law in Afghanistan and the Middle East. And he is also a veteran officer of the U.S. Air Force and a Truman Security Fellow. He's going to share some of his insights on cyber threat policy and technology trends. You will also have a chance to ask a few questions at the end of his presentation. Now, I would like to encourage you to join me in turning off our cell phones. Otherwise, up here, we can do that for you, so if you'd like. But before you completely turn them off, the South Dakota World Affairs Council would encourage you to text the word WORLD to the number 68398 so they can keep you informed about their programs. You can also check them out on the South Dakota World Affairs Council.org webpage or on their Facebook page. And I don't know if you want to like them. We'll see after this, right? That's all in jest. So now that we've taken a moment to address our technology issues, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Michael McNerney.
Thanks, Tracy. That was probably one of the nicest introductions I've ever had. I wonder if my mom paid you a little bit extra to do that. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here in South Dakota to talk with you about cybersecurity, cyber policy, and cyber war. As you mentioned, I'm going to talk for probably about, 30 minutes or so. And then I'd really like to encourage all of you to ask some really tough questions at the end so we can get a really good discussion going. Let's see if I can get my technology to work. All right, perfect. So the topic of today's lecture, and by the way, I am going to be using visuals for two reasons. First is I think this is a very complex subject, and I think it can be helpful to have something to reference as I go through the discussion. And as a former Air Force officer, I'm pretty much useless without my primary weapon system, which is, of course, PowerPoint. So we're going to use a few of these throughout the rest of the lecture. And by the way, yes, this does mean something. If anyone can figure that out, please do let me know. I won't give you too much time. Okay, so let's talk about cybersecurity. As many of you probably recognize, this is a term that is kind of made up and has come to mean many different things over the last couple decades. And as such, it kind of means all things to all people. So I thought it would be a good idea to start off with a very quick definition, just so we can all understand what we're going to be talking about here today and be on the same page. So the definition that I chose to go with is the one that we used in the military. That is cyberspace. It's the domain characterized by the use of electronics and the electromagnetic spectrum to store, modify, and exchange data via network systems and associated physical infrastructures. That's great. Actually, that's not that great. That's an incredibly broad definition if you think about it. That includes everything from CDs, DVDs, the internet, email, satellite communications, text messages, anything, right, that uses electronic communications is actually technically in this definition of cyberspace. And this, once again, is considered a domain for military operations, right? It's an incredibly broad definition, an incredibly broad domain, but it is the one that we use today for cyber operations. Okay, so this is what we'll be talking about today. First, I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the history and just a very little bit about the architecture of the internet. This is not going to be a technical conversation, but I do think it's helpful to have a very basic understanding of what a network looks like in order to understand some of the challenges and opportunities in cyberspace. Then we're going to talk about some of the vulnerabilities as well as some of the threats. Who are the bad guys out there that are trying to do us harm and why? And then finally, what are the implications for national security, foreign policy, conflict, war, peace, all of the above. Okay, so why is cyber so important? I think this is a question that's beginning to answer itself in recent days with the Edward Snowden leaks, with the massive attack on Target, but there are a couple other reasons as well. If you look back to 2007, 2008, we saw what was possibly the first use of cyberspace in a hostile environment, right? If you guys recall back to that time, Estonia and Georgia were having some, those are states in the former Soviet Union, were having some internal trouble, and they were essentially cyber attacked by what seemed to have been Russia, right, in an effort to kind of interfere in what was going on in their political establishment. That was a major wake-up call to the international community, the first time cyber was used in an international conflict in that sense. The next reason why this is so important, the massive loss of intellectual property, the massive loss of economic data, the massive loss of private information that cost potentially billions of dollars annually. I'll tell you frankly, we're not really sure how much it costs. Billions seems to be the right number, but it's so hard to get our arms wrapped around that we're not exactly sure. We believe it's in the billions, it may be more. And then finally, and this is the biggest concern for the government, is the growing threat to what we consider, what we call our critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure includes things such as the electric grid, the air traffic control system, the water system, nuclear power plants, anything that we critically depend on in order for our society to operate, and if it were to be taken offline, could be catastrophic, right? These things, as they become more connected and more connected to the internet and become more online, are also becoming vectors that can be attacked, and we're starting to see that happen today, and this has our government very concerned. So these are some reasons why we are concerned about cybersecurity and cyberspace today. As we go through the discussion, I'd like you guys to kind of keep these three things in mind. Number one, cyberspace. As I've mentioned before, this is a little bit of a controversial thing to say, but cyberspace has been classified as a domain by the military. However, unlike all of the other domains, and the other domains are things like air, water, land, space, right? The traditional spaces where we think about military conflict. Cyberspace is completely man-made, right? And it is also, especially in the Western world, private sector owned and operated, right? There's no other domain that remotely meets that definition. Second, cyber, in the government sense, is a derivative of something called signals intelligence, which is a form of electronic communication espionage that has existed for decades. And as we developed more reliance on computers and online systems, signals intelligence moved to become synonymous with cyber. So when the government thinks about cyber, they're often thinking about surveillance and signals intelligence. This is something to keep in mind as we go through. And then finally, this is something I mentioned at a dinner we had just a few moments ago. We're in the middle of a major revolution right now, a major societal revolution, the information age revolution. There have been several of these in the past, right? The first was the agricultural revolution, which happened thousands of years ago. That revolution also had an impact on military operations, right? The agricultural revolution allowed us to go from being hunter-gatherers to living in societies, which allowed us to have the rise of professional trades, including a professional standing army, which had not existed until that time. Revolutionized warfare. Later on, you had the Industrial Revolution, which gave us not only planes, trains, and automobiles, but also gave us mechanized warfare, right? Warfare on an industrial scale, which we began to see in the Civil War and probably reached its apex in World War II, right? So each one of these revolutions has had a major impact on how we conduct warfare. And now, as we're in the middle of the information age revolution, we're going to be seeing that again. What is the outcome going to be? What is the effect going to be? It's a little bit too early to tell, but it's almost certainly going to be something, and probably something quite major. Okay, so enough of the intro. Let's talk about the history and the architecture. Just a quick note, this is a graphical representation of the internet with these, I think I have a pointer here, with these little starburst things here are big nodes, and these lines are basically pathways, internet connections. So that's kind of like what the internet looks like in a graphic image. And then this, I don't know if you guys can see, is the first Apple computer. That's what it looked like. A little bit different today. All right, so let's talk about the birth of the internet. Some of you may know this already. But the internet was invented primarily by a defense agency called the Advanced Research Projects Agency. That agency is now named the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, and it was called the ARPANET. It was an experiment that was designed by scientists and researchers to see if they could communicate with each other. And as you can see, there was just a couple different points. Some guys on the East Coast want to talk with some other people on the West Coast, some people in between, just to see if they could share research, just to see if they could do it. There was absolutely no notion that the internet would be what it is today, that there would be billions of people accessing it, that people would have personal computers. That really didn't exist as a thing back then. That wasn't a notion in their mind. Security wasn't a concern either. Why would you need to be secure? You kind of, it's just a couple of researchers. You don't need to worry about bad guys getting on the system. So these things weren't really considered. Also at this time, it was actually illegal to conduct commerce on the internet. This was considered to be a government backbone, and conducting commerce was against the law. It wasn't until 1992 that changed, and with it, the internet became what it is today, this massive place for e-commerce and social networking and everything that it is today. Okay, so this is going to be like the most technical part of the briefing, so try not to laugh. So this is your basic scenario, right? So let's say I'm sitting here at my computer, and I'm a surfer, I enjoy surfing, and maybe I want to take a trip to Australia, check out the surf, awesome. So I say, okay, internet, take me to the Australia webpage so I can check it out. And this is the internet, okay? Which is pretty much what all of us think about when we think of the internet. So what's actually happening when we do that, right? When we go to the internet and say, bring me this webpage about Australia. What happens is, you're sitting here at your computer, you basically make a request to something called, to your server, right? DNS up there means domain name system, it's not important. You make a request to this server. This server is a lot like an operator, right? Back in the day, you might make a request to the operator. I would really like to talk to Jeannie Manzer, operator, and she lives in South Dakota. Can you connect me? And the operator would have a little phone book in there, and they'd look them up, and they'd say, yeah, sure, here's her phone number, let me connect you, okay? Somewhat similar in concept. So you make the request in English. I want to go to the website, australia.gov.au. It sends a request to this server. The server looks in its registry, in its phone book, and says, you know what, I don't know that address. Let me ask this guy. So it goes and asks a different server, a very basic, a root server. The root server says, I don't really know that person either, but I do know the .au server. Let's go ask him. And so you ask him instead. And you talk to the AU server, and he says, no, I don't really know that guy either, but I do know the .gov AU server. So you can see you're starting to get closer and closer to where you need to go. And finally, you reach this server, and this server says, yes, I do know this address. Here is the actual phone number, which is called an IP address. So you can go ahead and talk to them, right? And then you can make a connection and start sending information back and forth. So why did I just subject you to this? It's to show a couple things. Number one, that the internet's fairly loosely coupled, right? It's not a very rigorous or very rigid network. And there are any number of places for bad guys to hide. Here, and here, and here. They can pretend to be this guy. They can pretend to be this guy. So it can actually be quite an easy place to try to get away with bad activity if you want. Taking one larger step, this is what your typical network looks like. Maybe here on campus, maybe at your business. You're sitting here, you're making the same request out to the internet. Instead, you have to go through all of these different routers and switches. You have to go through firewalls and all this kind of stuff. Incredibly complex, right? The central message from here, this is very complex. It's very expensive, and it can take time. And again, all of these places are also places of potential vulnerability. And then finally, once you get out to the internet, there's you and your little network with your little firewalls, and there's Australia. This is kind of what the internet looks like. You have giant internet exchange points. These are physical points where the internet actually comes together. There's one in Miami, for example. These are your tier 1 internet service providers. They can basically connect everywhere in the world, just like AT&T and Verizon and whatnot. Then you have your tier 2 internet service providers. They have some connections, but they also take some from the tier 1 ISPs. And then you have your smaller ones that get everything from everyone else. So again, more complexity, more places to hide, and importantly for surveillance, anything that goes across these guys' networks, they get to see everything. They can see everything that goes across the network, right? So when we talk about the government going to ISPs and asking for information, this is essentially where that's happening. Because you can see they see everything between you and what you're trying to get at. Okay, that's it. That's the technical part of the discussion. As if that wasn't bad enough, the rules and laws and policies that dictate how we operate in cyberspace are probably even more complex and probably even more loosely coupled. If we wanted to conduct in the United States a cyber operation in a target state, whatever country you want, these are some things that we'd have to consider, right? We have third party. Maybe there's a server in here that we have to go through before we can get here. There's the internet, satellites. So we'd have to consider, first, U.S. domestic law. Is what we're doing in the U.S. legal? There's probably about 12 laws that you have to look through right there before you can do anything just domestically. Then you have to think about international law. Is what we're doing going to get us in trouble regarding the law of war? Is it going to get us called to the Hague as war criminals? You have to consider telecommunications law. You have to consider the telecommunications law of the foreign country. You have to consider humanitarian law. Law of the sea, law of the air. It's like just name whatever law you want. More foreign law. Law of the target state, right? As an attorney, and this is why we're so gainfully employed, you have to actually think through all of these things. Every time someone in the United States figures out a technical solution, we're going to go zap these guys. You have to figure out all of this before they can even do it, right? So there is just as much complexity and just as much work to be done when it comes to the rules and laws, maybe even more so than there is when it comes to the technology. Okay, so with those fundamentals out of the way, let's take a quick look at the vulnerabilities and the threats. This is just stupid. It's a bug. It's just a joke. Anonymous, I think most people know what that is, kind of a hacktivist collective. Anyone know what this is? Anyone want to take a guess? It is in Chinese, yes. This is, allegedly, a screenshot from a Chinese military computer that has a list of targets and a little button here that says, launch cyber attack. So that's kind of a user interface for a cyber attack, allegedly. Okay, so let's talk about our vulnerabilities. What are we facing? Today, As we talked about a minute ago, we're facing loss of intellectual property, loss of government secrets, threats to our privacy, credit card information, financial data, threats to our critical systems, as I mentioned before, right? Those are all really top concerns. Additionally, as if that wasn't enough, we're also facing risk in our supply chain. As more and more of our IT products are built and designed overseas, the less likely we are going to be able to guarantee their security. In fact, we can't. We can't do it. So supply chain security is also a big concern. If you can get something in the supply chain, it's going to be very hard for us to detect and very hard for us to stop. So this is also a growing concern for us. And then finally, this last point here talks about the code itself. I talked about how the internet is relatively kind of loosely put together, didn't really have security in mind. The code itself is also vulnerable. This is, statistically speaking, you're going to have about 10 to 50 errors for every 1,000 lines of code, right? There's really nothing you can do about it. It's just going to happen, largely due to human error, a couple other factors. All you can do is try to control for it, which means that code is inherently vulnerable. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie, I assume everybody has seen the movie The Matrix. This is partially the justification for Keanu Reeves' character, right? He's this anomalous thing in code that can't be controlled, only contained, and then he overthrows the entire world. Hopefully that last part doesn't happen. But that's the whole kind of premise for Keanu Reeves' character, right, is this notion. So what does that mean? Our programs are insecure. They have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Also, what this shows is that malware, the bad code, and good code, the stuff we do to try to defend against it, originally both started off at kind of the same level, right? Really, really small, really lean, not very vulnerable. Malware, bad code, has stayed that way. Malware has stayed over the decades small, average speaking, right? Average speaking here. It stayed very easy to use, very inexpensive. What we're doing to defend against it has gone from parity to now 10 million lines of code in our security systems today, which means that not only are our normal software programs vulnerable, but the security programs that we use to protect those programs are also massively vulnerable. And getting more so, right? Getting more so, diverging with the threat. This kind of thing right here terrifies military planners. You do not want to see divergence like this, because this becomes more vulnerable and more expensive. This gets relatively cheaper. And that's one of the reasons why offense has a little bit of an advantage today over defense. Okay, so those are some of the vulnerabilities. What are some techniques that bad guys are using to try to get us? I'm sure some of you are familiar with these terms already, but I'll go through them very quickly. Number one of the most popular, is called a distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS attack. This is basically where you kind of launch a lot of internet traffic at a target and kind of knock them offline for a while so they can't communicate. It's very effective. It's very popular. A botnet is a collection of compromised computers. So you have, instead of just using one computer to attack a bunch of people, you maybe enslave a bunch of computers to launch a coordinated attack. Phishing, this is the idea of you kind of pretending to be someone else in order to trick someone into clicking on a bad link or opening up a bad file. Incidentally, it's not clear yet, but this could have happened to Target. That could have been how the malware got into Target, an email that looked like it was from someone that it wasn't. Trojan, this also probably happened at Target. A software that does something other than advertise. You think it's a good piece of software. It's actually a really bad piece of software disguised as a good piece of software. Virus, this is typical malware, self-replicating file. A worm, similar to a virus, but doesn't need to attach to an existing program. And man in the middle, this is where, when you remember that diagram of the network, if you sit kind of in between the user and where they want to go and pretend to be where they want to go, you can kind of just observe all of their traffic, right? So all of these things are common techniques, common definitions. All of them are being used. And again, to bring it back to Target, several of these were probably used in the Target hack very, very effectively. All right, enough of that. So who's trying to do this to us, right? Who are the people and the countries and the organizations that we really need to be concerned about? In terms of capability, starting with the most capable, at the top, you have nation states, other countries. Everybody's heard about China. They're a huge threat, right? They're very capable. Russia is another country with enormous cyber capabilities. The United States, tremendous cyber capabilities. Great Britain has great cyber capabilities, and so on. So nation states are the most capable. Next down the list, I would argue, you have sophisticated non-state actors. These are organizations like Eastern European criminal enterprises, right? Hacktivist collectives, like potentially Anonymous, for example. Below that, you have terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. They have much of a cyber presence. Right now, they're not terribly sophisticated, but they're very eager to develop these capabilities. Below that, you have kind of your traditional lone wolf hacker. Can be capable, but usually not as much as these groups. And then lastly, not very capable, but potentially very dangerous and able to do a lot of damage are insiders, right? This is this is Edward Snowden, basically, someone that has access to your server, to your information internally, and can just walk off with it, right? This is often underreported insiders, but that is a huge challenge for companies, a huge challenge for governments, because these people are there legally, they're there lawfully, and they end up betraying your trust and walking off with information. So that's another potential threat. But I think it's important to point out that threat is not just about capability, right? Threat is about capability and intent intersecting at the same time. So when it comes to like the idea of who wants to do America harm, I would argue that although nation states have a lot of capability, they probably don't have the biggest intent. They want to spy on us, but I'm not so sure they want to actually hurt us. If they did, that would be an act of war, right? That wouldn't be good for them. So they're probably not the greatest threat right now when it comes to actual damage. Potentially, these guys are worse. Or terrorists if they can get more capability. So the notion here is that when thinking about who is after you and what you need to protect, you need to think about not only who can do this, but who wants to do it, and see if they intersect, right, somewhere on this arrow. And if so, then you have a problem. If they don't, then maybe you got some breathing room. Okay, so what does all this mean for conflict? Number one, as I said, the primary concern of the United States government, critical infrastructure. This is the nightmare scenario. When people talk about cyber Pearl Harbors and cyber apocalypse, this is what they mean, right? They're worried about someone hacking in to our air traffic control system and crashing planes, or shutting down our electricity grid, or doing something in the stock market. By the way, stock market, the New York Stock Exchange, has been penetrated before. There's reason to believe that hostile actors are starting to snoop around in some of these networks. So this is something that is very much of a concern to the government right now. Right? These things go down, it's terrible, terrible news for us. Right now, the question is both one of capability and intent. Who has the capability to do this? I'm not really sure. This is hard. Taking down critical infrastructure, very, very hard. Also, our critical infrastructure is like really, really old. So most of it's not online, or people who know how to hack it, are too old and don't know how to do it anymore. But that's going to change, right? That's going to change as these things become more modernized, as you see things like smart grid, which I think is going to be a great benefit to us, but it's going to be putting these systems online, potentially making them more vulnerable. The Internet of Things, I'm sure you've all heard of that buzzword, also potentially taking these things, putting them online. Great for productivity, great for our everyday lives, probably more efficient, lowers costs, all of that's great, but also makes them more vulnerable. And we actually have an opportunity here to think about security from the beginning, which we didn't do when we thought of the normal Internet. So I certainly encourage people to take time to think about security as they start to bring these things online. The next thing, cyber espionage. Cyber espionage is huge. All nations do spying. We've spied forever. Other countries spy on us. That's just the way it goes. What's different about cyber is the massive scope and scale, and the ease in which you can do it. The thought that you don't even have to enter a foreign country anymore, that you can hack in remotely and have access potentially to vast troves of data is incredible. It's incredible. It's possibly a game changer. I would argue that this, when it comes to the loss of intellectual property, is perhaps a more insidious threat right now than the threat to critical infrastructure. This is a longer-term threat to our American competitiveness, right? The United States, as a matter of policy, conducts espionage, but does not steal secrets from other nations' companies and give them to our companies for a competitive advantage. We do not do that. Other countries do that. And that puts us at a competitive disadvantage over the long run and potentially undermines our economy. And this is not really a good answer for this yet. It's not really a good answer for this yet. We're not going to bomb China because they stole our IP, right? That's not an act of war. We're not going to do that. Also, diplomatically speaking, you can't go to another country and yell at them for spying on us when we spy on them, right? Try to make the argument that it's, oh, we don't do economic, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be totally lost, right? It's a very, very hard argument to make. This right now, again, not a very good answer, and something that they're starting to spend more time on, but a very, very serious problem. Okay, so what does this mean for warfare? Right now, as I mentioned, the offense kind of has the advantage. It's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot quicker, and it pays well, right, to be a malicious actor in cyberspace. Defense, very hard, very difficult, very expensive. This is, right now, the trend is only even more so as the tools are becoming, on average, cheaper, more widely available. Just about anyone in this room could go online and if you knew what you were doing and knew where you were going, could buy a botnet, could buy a piece of malware to use for some reason, right? It's accessible and it's not terribly expensive. And the tools are becoming more and more advanced and more available. That's really bad when it comes to organizations like terrorist groups. As I mentioned before, they have a lot of intent but not a lot of capability. If these things keep becoming cheaper and more widely available, they will have the capability, and they will have the intent, and they will use it. And that is a very bad scenario. Also, as I mentioned, typically these diplomatic tools don't work very well. It's very hard to make the case, that other countries should spy on them like we spy on us, for example. Also, cyber will impact different nations differently. In the United States, we think of cyber as in securing our intellectual property, as in securing our government secrets. Other countries view cybersecurity as stifling free speech. How do you come to agreement with that? That's something that we absolutely cannot do. So how do you see eye to eye with a fundamental difference like that? There's no good answer for that. And then finally, the last implication for cyber warfare is the U.S. actually needs to think about divorcing cyber from surveillance and mature its capabilities. Right now, those capabilities are essentially linked. An analogy in my mind would be, again, I'm an Air Force guy, I keep coming back to that, would be in the 1930s, the Air Force was actually called the Army Air Corps and it was part of the Army. And it wasn't until the 1940s that it was separated and became the strategic asset that it is today. It had its own doctrine, it had its own capabilities, and became something that's now incredibly valuable. I think this needs to happen in cyber too. I think it needs to be divorced from surveillance so that it can mature and become more useful to us. It can also become more useful to us across the facets of national power, right? Diplomatic, political, economic. Imagine if we were able to use this as informational power, right? Instead of just trying to spy on people, we could say, okay, China, we're going to take down your firewall and let information flow freely in your country. That would probably terrify them, right? That would be a big deterrent to them. Or what if there was some strife in a country, in the Middle East or Africa, and their leadership was trying to cramp down on the internet, and we set up Wi-Fi so that their free Wi-Fi so that their freedom fighters could actually communicate. That's not really something we do now, but something I think we should consider, right? We should consider developing this as its own mature discipline, and hopefully that will come to pass. Okay, so finally, what does this all mean for you? I think it means a lot. Cyber is impacting all of you. If you're not being spied on directly by a nation state, you're probably having your private information, is possibly vulnerable to an organized criminal organization, right? That wants to take it. So this is tremendously impactful for you. We're going through these debates right now. We need to figure out where we stand on security, on privacy. We need to figure out what is the role of the government. What should we regulate? What should we let the free market handle? Will too much regulation stifle innovation? All of that. All of those things are up for debate right now. And if you have an opinion on it, you don't need to be an engineer. You can be anybody in the world and voice your opinion on it. These debates are happening right now. This will shape right now how cyber operations are conducted in the future. And one last thing to kind of keep in mind, and I've been guilty of this before as a Pentagon guy, security is not a means. I talked about a lot of security in this lecture, but security is a means, it's not an end. You have security in order to protect something valuable. You don't have security just to have security, because then you end up with a security state. And as Benjamin Franklin said, those who sacrifice freedom for the sake of security deserve neither. So you need to think about what we have that's valuable and how we want to protect it, not just lock everything down. And that's it. So with that, I will pause and invite you to ask any questions. And if you could, please, I don't think we have ushers, please come up to the microphone and give me your name and IP address, and Twitter handle.
Just a question. What can we do as individuals to protect our data?
Yeah, great question. So there are a couple things, David, right,
Yep.
that you guys can do, right? Unfortunately, I talked about this a little bit earlier today too. The system really asks a lot of you as an individual. I'll tell you right now what you need to do to protect yourself. It's outrageous. You need to have a strong username and password that's 16 characters long, that includes upper and lowercase letters, special characters, that is different for every single site, that you change every 3 months, and that you memorize and don't write down. You need to make sure that you're using the right Wi-Fi configuration. You need to make sure that you're using something called multi-factor authentication on your devices. I mean, the list is ridiculous, right? I'll tell you right now, the system is letting you down. That's too much to ask of any individual person. What I would suggest you do is be as smart as you can, right? Do the best job you can with having the strongest passwords that you can use. Be smart about the sites that you visit. Be smart about the information that you give out to people. The internet is great. It's incredibly convenient. It's been great for commerce, but there is that level of risk. So get smart about those risks and make those decisions. You know, do I really need to buy this online? Is this a shady site? All of that. I would say the best thing that you can do to protect yourself is, as a customer, as a consumer, demand that your government, demand that retailers and businesses take this seriously. You can do everything in the world. I mean, I was a little bit glib earlier. You can do everything in the world right to protect yourself, but if X company does a poor job, it doesn't matter, right? They're just going to get it on the back end. The hackers will get it on the back end. So I would say smart policies on your hand, and also, you know, make it known that this is something that's really important for you to be taken seriously by people up the food chain. Anyone else?
Hi.
Hi.
Congratulations on not mentioning Edward Snowden a whole lot during that presentation, although they're very intertwined. But I guess my question would be, you mentioned in the beginning how you have to adhere to a bunch of different types of laws for surveillance and espionage and that sort of thing. How is it that an Edward Snowden happens then?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why that happens. The first is after 9/11, we took a look at, like the 9/11 Commission, for example, took a look at how the government was handling security, specifically information. A lot of people were concerned that different agencies had different pieces of information, and if only we connected the dots, we could have prevented a 9/11. Right? That was a major finding from that commission. So what we decided to do was to break down the silos that kept information siloed. Right? Great. And I think that information sharing is on balance good, but that means that it is all widely available, right? It's much more widely available for people to access. The reason they put up those partitions was to keep that from happening in the beginning, right? They did it during the Cold War. So breaking those down made it much easier. Bradley Manning, same thing, right? He was able to access stuff that 10 years ago he never would have been able to access because there's no way DOD would have shared that with State Department. So that is one reason. I'm not saying it's bad. It's probably good to share information. But this is going to happen as a result. The other thing is, how we vet and clear contractors is a broken system, without question. And then finally, if you have a clearance and any technical capability, you can write your check. People will be following all themselves to hire you. So now people ask you questions. I get to ask a question of as well, right?
Okay, that's fine. I guess I was referring more to the capabilities that have been exposed now that the NSA-wise, as far as what their capabilities are for gathering this information, the different, the infamous now PowerPoint slides.
You mean how are they able to gather so much information legally?
Right, and the means that they use, which was previously unknown.
Yeah, so the supremacy clause is a beautiful thing. If you're able to pass a law that says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, you can do thus, then you can do thus. And if the federal courts say that's constitutional, it's constitutional. So it's not really a question when it comes to them of legality. I mean, the executive branch has enormous powers when it comes to war powers, enormous powers. Less so with law enforcement, but enormous powers with war powers. So it's easy for them to do that. So it's less of a legal question of, is it lawful to do this, and more of a question of, should we be doing this? Is this the right policy to be pursuing? And again, after 9/11, we tended to, rightly or wrongly, we tended to err on the side of security. And a lot of what the security apparatus wanted from Congress, it got. And some people think that's a good thing. Some people think it was overreach, but that's just what happened. So that's how they're able to do that. Now, there's some courts now, I think one of them recently decided that maybe what they did was overreach and it was unconstitutional. That's all going to be fought out in the courts. But as of right now, nothing that what they have done was illegal because of that reason. Yes?
Hello, sir. Thank you for your service. In relation to the previous question, over the past couple of years, due to the revelations from Snowden, a lot of people were pretty frazzled and scared about, well, I was first worried about hackers spying on me, but now I'm learning that the government is spying on me. Recently, a team of independent cryptologists and hardware developers announced the Black Phone, a new smartphone that was, and I quote, security-based and privacy-focused. So this is something like the first step of privacy becoming a commodity. Mm-hmm. Do you envision, if the USA continues down this immature path of cyber policy, do you envision a future where independent actors become the chief providers of security to consumers and to citizens rather than the government?
Yeah, that's a great question. Potentially, yes. The private sector is able to innovate technological solutions far faster than Washington can come up with policies and laws to back them up or support them or smother them to death, depending on what they decide or don't decide, which is what's fashionable today. I think that's a real potential. There are some things that are inherently governmental functions, right? Law enforcement, for example, that has to be an inherently governmental function. So there will be a role for government. Diplomacy, I mean, there's track 2 diplomacy and all kinds of diplomacy, but real diplomacy is really a governmental function, right? So there's some things that the government has to do. The government also has tremendous resources. Everything that we talk about and everything that some people are concerned about with the NSA, they also have the capability to do the opposite, right? They have tremendous capability, very smart people working there. And if that's what we wanted them to do, they could do it. So I do think that there's a role. There's very clearly a role for the private sector. Like I said in the beginning, it's a private sector owned and operated internet. And innovation coming out of places all around the country, Silicon Valley, whatnot, is incredible. So I do see, I guess to make this rambling answer shorter, I see it as a mix. I see it as there's a role for government, there's a role for the private sector. I see there being technological solutions to this, absolutely. And I see there needing to be a little bit of a policy solution as well. If people demanded privacy was taken more seriously, then it would be delivered. I mean, right now, no one pays for Google and no one pays for Facebook because we'd rather give up our privacy than pay for it. If people changed their minds, maybe you didn't make that conscious decision, but as a society, we kind of did. If people changed their minds about that, then that would become more of a reality in my mind. So, all right. Yes.
In reference to your answer to the first gentleman, as far as what we can do for our personal security, and the 16-character password that's unique to every website and you never write down anything like that. You may be familiar with the XKCD cartoon where we have our main form of security is generating these complex passwords that are very easy for computers to guess.
Right.
Hard for us to remember and easy for computers to guess. Right. Where do you see the future of passwords, and what do you see taking their place?
Yeah, I think passwords are dead, man. They're just the fact. I mean, you have to use them, right? They have to still be used, but it's very clearly a broken system. Just the fact that explanation is the right answer is outrageous. What will replace them? There are a couple different technological solutions that could be. Some companies are doing really interesting work on a form of like identity management, where it's like they get almost like a fingerprint of you based on your browser that you're using, your behavior online. They can almost be really, really sure that it's you. So you almost really don't need a password. You can use chip and pin combinations. There's some work in biometrics, iris scans and thumbprints. All kinds of different things. I don't know what will prevail at this point. They're all being tried. I mean, I have the iPhone. I can use a thumbprint on it. I'm sure that's easily hackable by somebody. But so Apple's trying that. Who knows? Who knows? It's all up for grabs, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My name is Jordan Allmer, and I was wondering, what's your current standing, or could you talk a little bit about people who are directly going against cybersecurity, organizations such as WikiLeaks, perchance?
Yeah, I think that goes back to that last point. I personally don't believe in just having security. I think you need to be sophisticated about this. You need to have it for a reason. You have it to protect valuable things, right? I would challenge you to come up with a definition of privacy that is not the exact same as the definition of security, right? A definition of security is freedom from harm, right? It is a kind of freedom. So, I mean, if you really think about it, they're not necessarily anathema. It just needs to be more nuanced, right? You shouldn't just lock everything down. You shouldn't just stifle dissenting views, all those kinds of things, right? Think about what's valuable. Think about why it's valuable and how you want to protect it. And then I think you can get at an answer that is more agreeable, maybe. Yes?
Coming from someone with a semi-basic background in electronics and stuff, would using a proxy be more, I guess, private, or would it help protect you against any threats online, or is that pretty easily hackable?
I guess, I mean, like anything, it depends on how you use it. So there are any number of different things that you can use that try to kind of remove your presence, that allow you to access the internet without putting any of your kind of information directly on it. They can be more secure if you know how to use them right. Proxies. Some people are doing work in virtualization that's similar. That's all possible. I think they're very, very interesting. They're just hard to do right, and if you don't do them right, it's like, why bother, So it's kind of a problem. Like, you need to have the technology and know how to use it well. Otherwise, you're no better off, I guess. I don't know if that helps, but.
Good evening. I'm Aaron Schultz. I'm an Army guy here on campus running the ROTC department.
No one's perfect.
We like to take care of the Air Force guys, too. But anyway, I've served in Afghanistan as well in 2010 to 2011. But I was wondering what your thoughts were. You talk about those catastrophic events, and the military always has things called rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Does the government have, per se, a rules of engagement or contingency plan if one of those catastrophic events would happen? Say a grid is taken down and we figure out that it was China that did that. Is there a plan to say, okay, we bring in military operations, special ops, or something like that?
Yeah. So to some extent, yes. To some extent, no. Cyberspace is this kind of new domain, but a lot of the rules that apply in traditional life still apply, right? So if a piece of critical infrastructure were to fail for, just take cyber out of it and just say X reason, it was hit by a bolt of lightning, what would the government response be? You could analogize a very similar response today. As far as the, so like the Department of Homeland Security would have a role, perhaps the National Guard. If it's truly a threat to national security, your big army will come in and handle it, right? I mean, there's no question that something catastrophic, they will send in the Marines or the Army or whatever, right? Like that will happen, whether it's cyber or not. As far as other nations, if they were to launch something that caused a catastrophic failure of our critical infrastructure, and we were reasonably sure that we were able to figure out who it was, and I think we could, that would be cause for war. That would be legal justification for war, and we would consider an armed military response amongst all of the other options, of course, but that would be on the table. All right. Any last questions? Yes.
Given that we have Edward Snowden, we have the NSA, we have Target, we have Neiman Marcus, do you think that we are nearing the bottom of this pit, or are we just looking at the top 5% of the iceberg?
I mean, I think that there will be more intrusions. That's definitely going to happen. So we're certainly not at the bottom from, are there going to be more hacks? Yes, there will definitely be more hacks. I do hope that we have started to round the corner, to use a different analogy, in how seriously we take this issue and how much time and resources we're willing to spend to fix it. Right now, a lot of these solutions are known, technologically speaking, they're known, right? What happened to Target, at least from what I've heard anecdotally, I'm not part of that investigation. There were a number of things they could have done that are known, like they just could have done them better, and they chose not to. And that's not atypical because security is very expensive, and that means you have to spend less money somewhere else. It's a business decision. So now maybe that decision will now change. Maybe not just Target, but everywhere, including the government, will start to take it more seriously as they see that the costs are much higher than they were before. I'm optimistic that that is the case. Time will tell. Yes?
Mike, so I have a quick question. So as you know, in San Francisco, there's a lot of technologists very upset right now, especially crypto people, for supposedly the NSA paying off RSA $10 million for the SSL, weakening SSL for everyone. Now, whether it happened or not, I mean, what's your opinion on that? Because honestly, there are advantages of the NSA for specific purposes to do such a thing, but obviously our whole critical infrastructure gets weakened to other nation states. It's a complex question. I think cryptographers simplify it. That's not the right thing to do for encryption, which is true. But what is the, I guess, more the government perspective if that thing actually happens?
Yeah, cryptology is a really, really complex issue, as you pointed out. I think it's still considered to be, it's still export controlled, right? Because we don't want other countries necessarily getting the best crypto. Again, I think the answer comes down to that last sentence. What is more important to you, right? Undermining cryptology arguably puts us at a competitive disadvantage overseas, right? Now we're seeing, in light of these revelations, foreign companies saying, don't buy U.S. products, they're not secure. Only we Europeans are secure. And our U.S. companies are losing business now because of that. So what's more important? Is it the economic security and prosperity of the United States, or is it the ability to conduct surveillance? That's an excellent question. What is it? Let me know. I'm glad to take it back to Washington. But I think that's it, and that's the discussion that they're having right now. Up until this point, that discussion was not had at all. It was, of course, security, of course, surveillance. Now they're saying, we forgot about economics. And so I think that that's going to start to be a part of the discussion, and maybe we'll see a better balance in the future, I guess. Yes?
With 3D printers becoming more easily attainable or obtainable, the designs for the printable guns at home, the computer animated designs, is there anything to be done about that through legislation to restrict those since they're now free from the internet?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there is a prohibition against doing that now. I could be wrong about that.
I'm not sure. That's what I was asking.
That's absolutely something that you can pass a law to say you can't do that, right? You can't print a gun in your home. Like,
Okay,
that's
so
a law you can pass.
Even if you do pass that law, if somebody has the plans, how do you stop it?
Yeah, that's the bigger question, right? How do you stop the illegal person, the person doing it illegally? That's tough, right? Once the genie's out of the bottle, once those plans are out there and 3D printers are available, how do you stop people from actually doing it? You know, how do you stop people from doing drugs? I mean, it comes down to enforcement at that point, and it'll be really hard. It'll be really hard. No good answer. Is that it? Okay, one more?
Somewhat related to the previous question regarding proxies. How serious of a threat do you think onion networks such as Tor and similar websites are as far as cybercrime, and what's the government's strategy on dealing with that?
So the government invented Tor. It was a Department of the Navy program. So for those who don't know, Tor is it's an onion router, and it allows you to basically surf the internet anonymously. It's free, and it's not illegal to use it. It's there and it's available. But that anonymity also means that a lot of criminals use it for criminal activity on the internet as well. That's a really tough question in government right now, right? So you have the question of, should we allow this kind of free and anonymizing program software to exist, or is that too much of a threat? That was a topic of discussion in the government when I was there, between State Department and the Pentagon, which are usually having these kinds of discussions. State Department typically really liked something like this because it can allow people in repressive regimes to communicate, right, without being cracked down. That's something that's free speech. That's a value that we Americans want to promote, right? On the other hand, you can also get around security protocols, which is something the Department of Defense doesn't like. So I don't know that there isn't a coherent, singular policy. Right now, there's no prohibition against using it. I've used it just to use it, and I may use it again. I don't know. But there's no real policy. I don't know that there will be a crackdown on Tor specifically for that reason, right? It would be seen as kind of cracking down on free use of the internet, which would be problematic. That would be problematic for our government to say that. So that means that there will be some bad that comes with it. Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. Really nice to meet you. Do you have any final